The council laughed at the Earth representative until they realized he was from a death world. The laughter started before I found my seat. I heard it from the entry corridor. Layered species mixed, some of it though. Clicking percussion of mandible-based humor and some the deep resonance of beings 4 times my size finding something genuinely amusing. I was carrying a thermos and a notebook. I had a badge clipped to my jacket that said, Earth Representative, in 7 languages. The smallest text was English. I walked in anyway. The chamber of the galactic conclave of 43 worlds was 30 m high and curved like the inside of a nautilus shell with 43 delegation tables arranged in a horseshoe below a ceiling that pulsed with soft amber light. Each table had a nameplate, a translation terminal, and a resting surface designed for the specific biology of whoever sat there. Atmospheric pods lined the outer ring for delegates whose home chemistry did not match the station's air blend. Earth's table was in the back row. I found it between a fungal collective. Their translator box sat in the center of a mat of living mycelium that had spread across the tabletop like something left in a damp corner for a week and gently encouraged to keep growing in a sealed atmospheric pod, the size of a large appliance inside, which a 6-armed delegate sat perfectly still and watched everything through 3 sets of ambered eyes. The nameplate in front of my chair was provisionally printed slightly different font from every other nameplate in the room, added late by someone who had not expected the addition to matter much. I sat down, opened my thermos, poured. The coffee was black and had brewed at slightly below optimal temperature because the breath transport shuttle that carried me the last leg of this journey ran its galley cool. The beans were from Pittsburgh, vacuum sealed, packed between my 2 dress shirts. When I left Earth 11 days ago, I had ground them every morning with a hand grinder the size of my fist in the small quarters the Vreth crew had assigned me. The crew member I had been privately calling Kale, his actual name was a sequence of clicks and pressure modulations that my vocal anatomy could not reproduce, had watched me do this each morning with the expression of someone witnessing ritual whose purpose remained deeply unclear to him. On the first morning, Kale had asked whether the ship's gravity, set to 0.6 standard, was comfortable enough. I told him sure. He asked again, louder and more carefully, deciding the problem was comprehension. I told him sure, again. He checked on me at irregular intervals for the rest of the 2-day journey, apparently expecting to find me in some form of gravity-related distress. Ship was running at roughly 6/10 of what I had been living in since the day I was born. I slept fine. I drank my coffee. I read through all 43 delegation files and made notes in the margins with a blue pen. Kale never fully stopped looking concerned. The walk from the docking bay to the session chamber took 11 minutes. I used every one of them. By the time I sat down, I had cataloged the corridor, construction materials, the gravity variance between station sections, the placement of every emergency pressure seal I had passed. I noted which delegations traveled with formal escorts, which traveled alone, and which ones were already gathered in clusters outside the chamber entrance, doing the informal groundwork that formal sessions would later make official. I noted Jill Carth from 50 m away. He was hard to miss. Breath ambassador. Front row, center position, blue-green. Iridescent plating that caught the amber. Ceiling light and scattered it sideways, in directions the light had not planned. His body was tall and lean in the way of a species whose home world pushes against you with less than half of Earth's gravity, hollow bones extended. Limbs, a skeletal architecture that was elegant and efficient for a gentler world than mine. He moved through the chamber with the unhurried ease of someone who had never once needed to be concerned about what was coming up behind him. His file was the first one I had read on. The shuttle, 40 years in breath. Diplomacy, 3 successful membership. Opposition campaigns in the last decade. The pattern was consistent. Question the value of the new member, slow the process, let procedural weight do the work while appearing measured and reasonable. He was smart, patient, and operated with the unshakable certainty of a being who had not encountered single surprise in this room in 4 decades. He looked at my entry badge when I walked through the door, 1 second maybe. 2. Then he said something to the delegate beside him. The laughter that followed was warm, unhurried, and entirely comfortable with itself. Several delegations joined. Without much deliberation, not all of them, but enough. It was the kind of laughter that does not require a shared language because the reason is standing right there in the doorway, soft-boned and pink, carrying a thermos. I walked to my seat. I sat down. I opened my notebook and wrote, Jill. Carth, front row, left mandible touch. When condescending. Beneath that I wrote, breath, home world. 0.38 standard gravity, 0.6 atmospheric pressure, no indigenous apex predators. Removed them 4,000 years ago. I underlined removed them. Then I poured a second cup. The session chair, Councillor Voreth, called the room to order with the practiced ease of someone who had done this for close to 80 years and had no patience remaining for drama that had not been scheduled. She was Drev Ari, 6-limbed, the muted silver gray of deep ocean silt, moving with the fluid economy of deep water. Her translation program gave her a voice that sat just beneath music, low and clear, and waited with the particular patience of a being who has heard every possible argument and has decided to let everyone finish anyway. She moved through the opening procedures without ceremony, attendance, confirmations, translation protocol, verifications, observer applications, pending formal review. When she reached Earth, she said, the delegation from the 3rd planet of the solar system attend this session. Observer capacity, pending membership. Review, the representative is invited to introduce their world. Every optical cluster, sensor array, mandible set, an atmospheric reader in the room oriented toward the back row. I looked up from my notebook. Sure, I said. I gave 4 sentences, 7 continents. Population approximately 8 billion. Estimated sapient species, age 200,000. Years, current technology classification. Early interstellar development stage. I stopped. I had not mentioned the planet itself. At the front of the room, Jill Cath's left mandible performed the small movement I had already written down. In the far corner, behind the 43 tables, and their light and their noise, an archivist sat motionless. Archivists attended every conclave session, recorded everything, spoke almost never, and were treated by most delegations as somewhere between very old furniture and institutional conscience. This one was pale and long-limbed, and he had been watching me since the moment I walked in. His name was Solon. I would learn that later. When I finished my 4 sentences, Solon did not write anything. He already had what he needed. He just kept watching me with the quiet attention of someone who has recognized a word in a language most people in the room do not know they are hearing. The session moved on, a trade dispute between 3 outer system worlds, long-standing border recognition claim, a climate assistance application from a world whose star was entering in instability phase. Nobody looked at the back row again. Earth was boring. Earth was a provisional nameplate. Earth was one man with a thermos and a cracked spine, notebook and 4 sentences that had not mentioned the planet once. I wrote one more line before the session fully moved into formal business. Same small handwriting as everything else. They don't know yet. I underlined it twice, turned the page, kept taking notes. The formal debate over Earth's membership began the following morning. I arrived early, not because the files required it. I had read everything twice, but because arriving early to unfamiliar spaces is something my body does without asking me. 8 years of disaster coordination will do that. You stop waiting to feel ready, and you start moving before the problem fully arrives, because the problem never waits for you to feel ready. The chamber was mostly empty. The amber ceiling light was running lower than the before a pre-session setting, and the air carried the faint mineral smell of atmospheric processes cycling through overnight maintenance. I poured my coffee, opened my notebook to a fresh page, and wrote the date and time in the upper right corner. Then I wrote, second day formal membership review, opposition motion already filed. Then wrath leading opposition expected. The room filled over the next 30 minutes, 43 delegations finding their places, translator terminals chiming to life, the atmospheric pods for the outering species pressurizing with a low hiss I could feel more than hear. Jill Krath arrived with 3 members of his delegation staff, took his front row seat, and did not look toward the back. He did not need to. The session chair called order. Councillor Voreth moved through the agenda with the same unhurried precision as the day before. When she reached the membership review for Earth, she noted the opposition motion filed by the Wrath delegation and invited the floor to proceed. Jill Krath stood. He was a compelling speaker. I had expected that. His translation program rendered his voice at a resonant mid-frequency that the chamber's acoustics caught and carried cleanly. And he had the particular rhetorical rhythm of someone who has made this argument before and has learned exactly where to slow down and where to land hard. He laid out the case against Earth's membership in measured terms: technology, classification, early interstellar development stage, the lowest tier for any applicant in conclave history, infrastructure, no established off-world presence beyond a single borrowed shuttle, biological profile, soft tissue species with no documented resilience modifications, limited atmospheric tolerance range, and a natural lifespan he described diplomatically as notably short by galactic standards. Then he gestured toward the back row. The gesture was not theatrical. It was almost considerate, the kind of gesture that says the evidence speaks for itself and I am simply drawing your attention to it. More laughter, warmer than yesterday. Even delegations that had seemed neutral joined in now. The atmosphere in the room was light, almost comfortable, the way rooms feel when everyone has quietly agreed on the outcome and is simply waiting for the procedure to confirm it. I took a long drink of coffee. Then I raised my hand. Counselor Voruth acknowledged me. I have a question, I said, for the ambassador. Jill Cath's mandible moved. He nodded, with the graciousness of someone who expects the question to be easy. What is the surface gravity on breath? Prime, I asked. A pause, 0.38 standard. Atmospheric pressure, 0.6 standard. I wrote both numbers down slowly in my notebook, then looked up, and the pathogen diversity index for your homeworld current classification. A longer pause, the breath delegations. Science aide leaned over and said, something. Jill Cath answered, Class 2, low baseline, actively managed. How long has it been actively managed? Several thousand years. And indigenous apex predators, how many species currently hold that classification on breath? Prime. The pause this time was long enough that the room noticed it. None, Jill Cath said. The last natural apex predators were removed from the ecosystem 4,000 years ago as part of a controlled environmental management. I said. Just that, nothing else. I wrote something in my notebook. That tracks, I said. I looked back up at him. He had nothing to do with that. He had just answered factual questions, but the room had shifted the way rooms shift. When someone introduces a variable that changes the shape of the problem without explaining how. A second delegate stood. Pylori, the Valen species representative, gas giant. Atmospheric origin enormous, the outer surface of his containment suit iridescent in the way deep ocean creatures are iridescent, meaning beautiful and untouchable. Simultaneously, Pylori's voice, translated, came as a sustained low tone with specific modulations rendered into words at a half-second delay. He proposed formally and with apparent kindness that Earth be reclassified from full membership review to developmental observer status, the most appropriate designation, he said, for a world at Earth's current technological stage. It carried no stigma. Many of the conclave's most valued current members had held that designation at some point in their development. It was, in every practical sense, polite way to put Earth in a box and close the lid. I did not object. I asked Pylori what the escape velocity of his home world was. The translator rendered his response at a volume that suggested the question had caught him unprepared. He answered the number was low, well below Earth's standard. His home world's gravity was minimal, the atmosphere buoyant, the surface conditions what I would classify as thoroughly managed. I wrote the number down. Then I asked about the Valen species biological resilience rating. The translator paused before rendering the answer. Class 1 minimal. Environmental sensitivity high. Thank you, I said. I closed my notebook and put my pen down, parallel to its spine, the way I always did when I was finished writing and starting to think. The laughter from earlier in the session had dissolved, not loudly, not with any announcement. It had gone quiet the way a room goes quiet when something small and unremarkable has just been identified as something else entirely, and everyone is waiting to see who will say it first. Nobody said anything. Solon in the far corner had still not moved. He had been still the entire session, but now there was a quality to his stillness that was different from furniture and different from patience. It was the stillness of someone who knows what is in a box before the lid comes off and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. Counselor Voreth recognized him. Solon stood. In the interest of procedural completeness, he said, and his voice had the flat precision of someone reading from a document that exists in a very specific category. I would like to formally request that the Earth Planetary Classification file be entered into the session record before the membership vote proceeds. A murmur crossed the room. This was unusual. Archivists could make record entry requests technically. It almost never happened. Jill Carth's mandibles opened and closed once. Then he said, with the comfortable assurance of someone who has reviewed 1,000 routine files and expects this to be another one, yes, of course, let the record reflect the Earth file, by all means. He said it the way you say of course to something that cannot possibly matter. I poured more coffee. Sure, I said. Solon opened the file. He read aloud, standard intake format. The same structure used for all 412 worlds in the conclave's active membership database. Most files took 6 minutes to read, some took 8. His voice was measured and unhurried, the translation program rendering it in the flat, precise register of official record. It started the way every file started. Surface gravity 1 standard, normal no reaction from the room. Atmospheric pressure 1 standard, normal. Atmospheric composition, nitrogen-oxygen. Blend primary standard. Average solar radiation index, Solon. Paused here, a small pause, the kind you notice only because it was not there for the previous 3 entries. Elevated, he read several ultraviolet wavelengths present at surface level without full atmospheric filtration on certain bandwidths. Long-term sapient exposure ongoing and unresolved. A Pelori delegate shifted in its containment suit. The translator rendered the movement as a request for clarification. Solon continued. Tectonic activity classification. Active, ongoing, uncontrolled. The room was listening, but the quality of the listening had changed. It was paying attention the way you pay attention when you realize you do not know where something is going and have started to suspect the destination. Matters. Seismic event frequency several thousand detectable events per Earth year, dozens of events at civilization threatening scale per century, irregular, non-predictable, geologically permanent. A delegate near the front said something in its native language. The translator rendered it as, repeat that. Solon repeated it without inflection. Extreme weather classification, ongoing. Unresolved, category permanent state of atmospheric instability, generating large-scale destructive events at irregular intervals across all landmass, regions, and ocean surfaces. The word permanent landed differently than the others. Someone near the center of the room said it again quietly, as if testing whether it meant the same thing when you said it out loud. Solon kept reading. Ocean coverage, 71% of surface area. Active tidal systems, underwater. Tectonic movement. Surface storm generation ongoing. Average ocean depth, 2,000 m mean. Maximum depth recorded, 11 km. 11 km, said a voice, not a question. Just the number repeated the way you repeat a number when you are checking your own comprehension. Solon moved to the next section. Indigenous apex predator count. He stopped reading aloud. He pulled the file closer. He read something silently. He looked at it the way you look at a number when you want to confirm it is actually that number, and not a transcription error from an intake form submitted by someone who had never been to the planet. He read the number and the detailed, categorical breakdown that followed it. Apex predators by land region, by ocean region, by aerial classification, by freshwater system. He looked up at me. I was looking at the wall. There was no window. I was looking at the wall. Anyway, he read the numbers aloud, all of them. One category at a time. 43 delegations in a 30M chamber with translation programs running in real time. The room was completely silent. Solon kept going. Pathogen Diversity Index, Class 6. Active, dynamically evolving. The entry had a footnote he read without pause. Sapient species has developed internal biological defense mechanisms that engage and adapt to novel pathogens real time without external management. This capacity developed over approximately 200,000 years of continuous exposure and has no parallel in the current membership database. He turned the page. Average non-sapient organism lifespan. 90% of Earth's non-sapient animal species under 4 years. Average sapient individual lifespan without technological medical intervention, approximately 40 years. Current average lifespan with modern medical infrastructure, approximately 78 years. A delegate's translator rendered a sound as repeat the first number. 40 years, Solon said, without technological medical support. The Caith Communion delegate made a sound. The translator flagged as unclassified. Emotional expression. Solon turned to the final section. Sapient species survival record. Pre-technological era. He read the summary. Marcus Vale's certification file had required. The species had survived 200,000 years on the planetary surface, without sealed habitats, without atmospheric processes, without gravity management, without external pathogen suppression infrastructure, without controlled food cultivation for the majority of that period, directly on the surface of a planet, classified as active, unstable, biologically saturated at Class 6, and in permanent meteorological crisis, breathing its unfiltered air and living on whatever the environment provided. Between events that periodically reduced the total population to numbers the genomic record described only as critical threshold. Solon stopped. He closed the file. The room was not making any sound, not the mandible click of casual species communication, not the low hum of translator programs catching spoken fragments in the background, not the hiss of atmospheric processes in the outer pods. Nothing in the chamber made any sound. Geelkarth spoke. His voice was quiet in a way it had not been quiet once in 2 full days of sessions. He was not making an argument. He was not being diplomatic. He just said, in the kind of voice you use when the calculation comes out wrong and you need someone to show you where you went wrong. How did you not go extinct? I picked up my thermos. Took a long drink. We did, I said, a few times mostly. I set the thermos down. Some bottleneck events, I said. I said bottleneck the way you say. Traffic, the way you say a thing so many times that most of its weight stops traveling with the word in daily use. Nobody in the chamber said anything for a very long time. Then the questions started. They were careful questions, not the performative rhetorical questions of a formal session where the conclusion is already known. These were the questions of beings who had just encountered a data set that did not fit inside any category they had been trained to use and were trying, methodically and with visible effort to find the edge of the problem. A biologist delegate from the Keth communion went first. The Keth were a fungal colonial intelligence, their individual nodes networked across their home world in a distributed consciousness approximately 12,000 years old. Their biologist spoke slowly in. The translator rendered each sentence with care. They wanted to understand human immune function. I explained it. I explained it the way you explain something you have never had to explain before because it had never occurred to you that it required explanation. The human immune system is two systems running simultaneously. One that operates on recognition, attacking known threats based on a database built and updated over a lifetime, and one that operates on complete novelty, generating targeted responses to threats it has never encountered before within hours and then permanently recording the solution for future use. It has been doing this for 200,000 years on a planet classified Class 6. Pathogen diversity, active dynamically, evolving without any external management infrastructure for most of that time. The Keth biologist was quiet. Then it said, you have no external pathogen management infrastructure. Not historically, more recent developments exist, but the baseline has always been internal. Your bodies do this individually. Every individual body, yes. Starting from birth. Starting before birth, technically, the system develops in the womb. The Keth biologist turned to the Keth communion's general delegate and said something that the translator did not render. Whatever it was, it caused the entire Keth delegation table to go still, all of them at once, in the specific way a networked consciousness goes still when all its nodes are processing the same piece of information simultaneously and have not yet finished. Then the biologist said quietly, our home world has been sterile for 6,000 years. We eliminated all pathogenic organisms as a planetary health measure in the early period of our technological development. I said, we have no immune systems. Our nodes do not require them. I wrote that down. That's different, I said. Pelori spoke next. The translation lag was half a second longer than usual, which I had come to understand meant the question was complex enough that the program was making interpretive choices. Pelori asked about human psychological response to environmental threat. We adapt, I said. The translator rendered the follow-up. To what degree? I thought about it. I gave it real consideration, the kind you give a question whose answer you have never had to articulate because it has always been too obvious to need saying. I was a disaster relief coordinator for 8 years, I said. I worked after storms, floods, earthquakes, large-scale infrastructure failures across multiple continents. I worked one event, a major storm hit a coastal city, winds near 160 km/h. The city was under 4 m of water in 6 hours, about 40,000 people displaced. In one night, Pelori waited. When the evacuation teams arrived the following morning, people were pulling neighbors out of collapsed buildings. No central coordination, no instruction. They had organized themselves into informal search groups, identified which buildings needed checking, set up a rough priority system for who needed medical attention first. Some of them had been standing in debris-filled water for 6 hours before help arrived. They were in shock, Pelori said. Some of them, others were just fine. The word sat in the translated air of the chamber. Fine, Pelori said. Not unaffected, I clarified. Not happy about it, just operational. They had a problem in front of them, and they were solving it. The emotional processing comes later, or sometimes it doesn't come at all. Both are normal outcomes. Pelori made a sound the translator took several seconds to render. It came through as, we do not have a category for this response pattern. I wrote that down too. Solon in the corner had begun writing. For the first time in 2 days of sessions, I noticed that. I kept my face neutral and kept going. Jill Carth had not spoken since the extinction question. He was president, his chair watching, but the quality of his attention had changed. Yesterday it was the watching of someone waiting to confirm a foregone conclusion. Today it was the watching of a being doing a genuine recalculation and taking the time it required. The Marath delegation, a tripedal species with large sensory clusters around their upper torso, a group I had not had time to fully research before the session, asked about Earth's young, specifically at what age human children were considered capable of independent survival. That depends on your definition of survival, I said. Basic survival without adult supervision in natural conditions. I consider the question with access to natural resources and in a familiar environment, somewhere between 8 and 12 years old for most children, depending on the individual and the region. Earlier, in more demanding environments, children have survived alone in wilderness conditions at ages younger than that in documented cases. The Murath delegate was silent. For context, I offered the natural environments I am referring to often include several of the apex predator categories from the file. The Murath delegate made a sound the translator rendered as clarification. Needed, do you mean the children occupy the same environment as the apex predators? In many historical cases, yes, I said. In current conditions, less directly. But the baseline physiological and psychological development was shaped by those conditions across 200,000 years. So the capacity persists regardless of the current threat level of the immediate environment. The Murath delegate turned to the delegate beside it and had a conversation neither translator caught in full, both parties speaking at the same time, the program flagging the exchange for later transcription. A delegate from the Sarath collective, an elder species, long memory, careful decisions, one of the few delegations that had been in this chamber longer. Then Counselor Voreth asked about recovery, not during crisis, after. How does your species rebuild following major loss? The delegate asked. I thought about the specific weight of that question. We rebuild, I said. Every city that has ever been destroyed has either been rebuilt or had another city built. Somewhere close by. The names persist, even when the original structures are entirely gone. The name is how we keep the location inside the people instead of inside the buildings. Every time the Seraph delegate asked, without exception that I know of, even after the largest events, the ones in the file, the ones that reduced population to critical threshold, those took longer, but yes, the Seraph delegate was quiet for a moment, then it asked why. Not rhetorically, genuinely. I looked at it because the people are still there. The city is where the people live. If the people survived, the city survived in the only way that matters. The buildings are just buildings. The Seraph delegate wrote something. Solon in the corner wrote something. 2 archivists writing at the same time, which I suspected had not happened in this chamber in a very long while. Gilkarth spoke. He said, "You are not here because you need us." I looked at him. "No," I said. "You are not here for protection or for technology exchange as a primary driver, or for institutional membership as validation of your development stage." He said it with the careful precision of someone reading a conclusion back to confirm they have understood it correctly. You came because your government decided to look for others. After 200,000 years of no one coming to you. I did not answer that. I picked up my thermos. The word alone did its own work in the room. I did not need to add anything to it. Gilkarth's mandibles moved once, then they went still. He looked at me for a long time, not with the casual assessment from the day before, but with the specific attention you give something when you have just realized you have been making a fundamental error about its nature and are recalculating from the beginning. He looked, then he looked away. Counselor Voreth noted that the session had exceeded its scheduled time by 42 minutes and proposed a recess before the formal vote. Nobody argued. I closed my notebook, put my pen down, parallel to the spine, and poured the last of my coffee. I wrote one more thing before I stood. I wrote Solon is writing. The vote was scheduled for the following morning. The night before, in the small quarters the station had assigned me, I finished the last of the Pittsburgh coffee and read back through everything I had written across 3 days, 47 pages of notes, names, numbers, behavioral observations, questions, responses, the shape of the room at different moments, in different lights. Owen, my supervisor at the Department of External Relations, he had been in the role exactly 6 months before Earth's first contact protocols went from theoretical to immediately and urgently necessary, had asked me before I left what I was most concerned about. I told him I was mostly concerned about the coffee situation. The transit would be long and I was not sure what the Vreth shuttle would carry. He had looked at me the way Kale would later look at me, expecting visible distress, finding something else. "Marcus," he said, "you are going to represent Earth in front of 43 alien civilizations. You are going to be the first human being in history to walk into that chamber." "I know," I said. "And you are thinking about coffee." "I am thinking about everything," I said. "The coffee is just the part I can control." Owen had been quiet, then he said, "Don't start any interstellar incidents." "Sure," I said. Sitting in my station quarters, I thought about that conversation. I thought about the shape of what had happened over 3 days and what the room had looked like when Solon closed the file and what Gilles Carth's face had done when he said, "You are not here because you need us." I thought about the Keth biologist going still, all nodes at once, processing the same piece of information simultaneously. I thought about what Solon had written in his notebook for the first time in 2 days of sessions. I did not know what it said. I knew what it was about. I thought about the bottleneck events. I had said that word the way you say traffic, a bottleneck event, a population reduction, a near extinction. The genomic research had mapped them with uncomfortable precision, moments when the entire human species had been reduced to numbers small enough that a single bad year could have ended the whole project entirely. Volcanic winters, population crashes so severe. The geneticists found the evidence of them written into our shared DNA like scar tissue. And then we had not ended. And then we had kept going. I rinsed the thermos, went asleep. The chamber the next morning had a different quality, not in the lighting or the temperature or the composition of the air. Those were unchanged. The difference was in the delegations themselves, the way they settled into their positions with something more deliberate than routine. Several delegations that had sat largely silent through 2 days of sessions had moved forward in their chairs or repositioned their translator terminals or arranged themselves in ways that suggested they intended to be present for this in a different way than before. Gilles Carth withdrew the opposition motion before Councillor Voreth called the floor to order. No explanation, no statement, no procedural commentary of any kind. He filed a withdrawal, sat down, and looked at the table in front of him. The room noticed. Councillor Voreth acknowledged the withdrawal and called for a revised motion. The motion that came forward from the Sarath collective delegate who had written in that notebook the evening before and whose species was known throughout the conclave database for long memory and careful decisions was for full Tier 1 membership, permanent seat, no resource restrictions, no development stage conditions attached, the full measure, the highest classification available to a new member. The vote was called. It was unanimous. 43 delegations, 43 votes. I wrote high in my notebook. Then I closed it. Councillor Voreth moved through the formal certification procedures with her usual precise efficiency, permanent seat, assignment, translation protocol, integration, access credential issuance. She did all of it the way she did. Everything unhurried, complete, the 80 years of this room in every motion. When she finished, she asked if the Earth delegation wished to make a statement for the session record. No, I said, thank you. She noted it, moved on. The session continued, other business, trade certification renewal, and amendment to an existing border treaty. The procedural flow of 43 civilizations, moving forward the way it always had, the way it had been moving for decades, before a man from Pittsburgh walked in from the back row and asked some questions about gravity. I stayed for all of it. I always stayed for all of it. After the session closed, when the chamber was clearing and delegations were moving toward exits, Solon crossed the room. He walked the way archivists move, covering the distance without appearing to hurry, arriving as if he had always intended to be exactly where he ended. Up, he stopped across the table from me. He did not sit I have been an archivist for 53 years. He said, I have attended 412 first contact proceedings. I said. I have read the intake files for all 412 worlds currently in the conclave's active membership database. All of them. Yes. I waited. Earth is the only world in the active database, Solon said, classified as an active, ongoing, uncontrolled geological and biological threat environment in which sapient life not only survived, but maintained continuous civilization-building activity for the full duration of its existence without developing any mechanism to control or reduce the fundamental threat level of the environment itself. I thought about that. We have some mechanisms, I said, building some seawalls, increasingly reliable weather prediction systems, vaccines. You adapted to the environment, Solon said. You did not reduce it. Reducing it would have taken a great deal of work. We were busy with other things. Solon looked at me for a long moment. I knew what was in your file before the session, he said. I reviewed the intake record the night you arrived on station. You watched me for 3 days anyway. Yes. Why? Because the file tells you what a species has survived, Solon said. Watching tells you what they became. Because of it. He looked at me with the flat, clear attention of someone making a final note in a very long record. Something in his expression had the quality of a finding, not a surprise because he had prepared himself, but the particular quality of a conclusion reached after careful observation that confirms what the data suggested and does not leave room for revision. And what did you conclude? I asked. He did not answer immediately. He took the pause that archivists take, not hesitation but calibration, finding the exact right words for something that will be written down and kept in the permanent record of this institution for as long as the institution exists. That the file understates it considerably, he said. He inclined his head, the archivist's formal acknowledgement reserved for records they classify as significant, and walked back across the chamber to the corner where he always sat. I watched him go. I poured the last of the coffee from my thermos, cold by now. I drank it anyway. Counselor Voreth came last. The chamber was nearly empty. The amber light had shifted to its post-session register, soft and low. Her 6 limbs moved with their usual fluid economy as she stopped across from me and stood for a moment in the way of someone who has decided something and is taking the last available second to confirm it. She used the specific linguistic register. I would have it confirmed later by a language specialist back on Earth that the Drevani reserved for addressing someone whose capabilities they had formally assessed and found to be genuine, not diplomatic softening, not polite professional deference. The register used for addressing those in a specific category of capable register that carried with it the weight of 80 years of rooms like this one and the judgment of someone who had seen every possible version of every possible thing and was now looking at something that did not fit neatly into the existing version set. What does Earth want from this council? Representative Vale, she asked. I thought about it. Real consideration, the thermos in one hand, the closed notebook on the table. In front of me, 47 pages of notes taken. In a room where nobody had expected the person taking them to be worth watching. Trade would help, I said, Technology. Exchange where it makes sense for both. Parties, we have problems at home. We could use partnership on climate. Stabilization, some medical. Infrastructure gaps, long-term energy. Transition challenges, nothing we cannot. Manage faster with partners. And in return, Counselor Voras said. I looked at her, then I looked at the room. The chamber of the galactic conclave of 43 worlds, empty now, amber light. Running low over 43 tables and 43 nameplates and 43 empty chairs, one of which in the back row was no longer provisional. 43 civilizations that had built their worlds into controlled, managed, safe places over centuries, who had removed their apex predators and filtered their pathogens and regulated their atmospheres and built stations that orbited gas giants in the dark, between stars 200 light-years from anything urgent. 43 civilizations that had found each other out here and built something together that had been standing long enough to feel permanent. I thought about what Pelori had said. We do not have a category for this response pattern. I thought about the Keth biologist and all of its nodes going still at the same moment, processing something it had no existing framework to process. I thought about Gilles Cart's face when he withdrew the opposition motion, not angry, not embarrassed, the face of someone who has just understood something correctly for the first time, after a long period of understanding it incorrectly, and who is deciding what to do with that understanding. I thought about Owen 6 months into the most unusual job in human history, asking me not to start any interstellar incidents. I thought about Cal checking on me 3 times a day on the shuttle, expecting to find distress, finding someone who just wanted his coffee at a reasonable temperature and had a great deal of reading to finish. I thought about the bottleneck events. I thought about the genomic record of every moment the whole project almost ended and then did not end. Accumulated evidence of 200,000 years on a planet that never once decided to be gentle, written into the biology of every human being alive in the specific way that long survival writes itself, not as trauma but as architecture, the actual structure of what we are, shaped by everything that tried to unmake it and failed. I thought about how far the dark goes, beyond what 43 civilizations have mapped so far. I thought about what is out there that has not found them yet, and I thought about what it means to have spent 200,000 years becoming very, very good at the not going extinct part, and then to look up one day and realize you are the only thing in the known galaxy that went through that particular school. In return, I said, we will stand between you and whatever is out there. I said it the way you say, I can carry that for you, the way you say it when you mean it, and it does not feel like a grand gesture because it is just the obvious next move, the way you offer something that you have and someone else needs, and the only question was always whether to say it or not. Counselor Voruth was still, not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of a being receiving something it had not known it needed until it was offered, and who is now doing the work of understanding what it means to need it and to have it answered. We have been in this space for a long time, she said, far longer than your species has been building. We have not encountered anything we could not manage. That's good, I said. But she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Because the but was the whole point. The but was the thing that had been sitting quietly in the back of every session for however long this institution had been running. The but was what you feel when you have built something careful and good and lasting, and you look up from it and realize the space around it is very large and you do not know everything that is in it. But you have not met everything yet, I said. Neither have we. We've been practicing for 200,000 years though, and we are reasonably good at the surviving part now. I stood up. So if something finds you, I said, you call us. I said it plainly, without theater, the way a neighbor says call me if you need anything. Not a performance, not a promise designed for an audience, but the specific kind of offer made by someone who has already decided they will show up and is only covering the logistics. Counselor Voruth looked at me for a long time. Then she said, in the register she used for formal session entries, the words that would be recorded and kept and translated into 43 languages and filed in the permanent archive of the galactic conclave of 43 worlds, the Earth. Delegation statement has been noted for the conclave record. Sure, I said. I picked up my thermos, picked up my notebook, walked out. The corridor was the same muted purple-green aquarium light, the same width, the same floor, the emergency pressure seals all in the same positions I had cataloged on the walk-in 3 days ago. My footsteps made the same sound. Nothing had changed. I drank the last half swallow of cold coffee before I reached the docking bay. 4 beans left in the vacuum-sealed bag. I would need to pick up more when I got home. A good brand, something from the roaster on Penn Avenue, the small one with the hand-painted sign. A communication request from Owen was already waiting on my terminal. Subject line, full debrief required. Report in, also what happened. I drafted the reply in my head before I reached the shuttle. It said went fine, full report. Incoming, bring coffee beans to the debrief. I did not send it yet. I stood at the docking bay window. Gas giant the station orbited turned slowly in the view, its bands of amber and rust moving in a gravity well no one had ever fully explained. 200 light years from pharmacy, where I had bought the notebook that now held 47 pages about the first 3 days of Earth's membership in the known galaxy's primary governing body. I thought about the session, all 3 days of it, the laughter in the entry corridor, the file, the questions, Gilles Kath's face, Solon writing for the first time, the vote, Counselor Voruth's register. I thought about 43 civilizations out here in the careful managed dark, and one more now. I thought about what we are, what 200,000 years on a planet that never decided to be gentle, actually makes not heroes, not warriors, not anything so clean as that, just people who have been solving the next problem since before they had words for it, and who are reasonably good at it now, and who looked up one day from the work and decided to go find out who else was out there. I turned from the window, walked down the docking corridor, boarded the Vreth shuttle, sat in my assigned quarters, opened my notebook to a new page. At the top I wrote, Day 4, heading home, membership confirmed, full report to follow. Cale knocked on the open door frame. He had the expression I had come to recognize as his version of not knowing what to say but feeling like something should be said. Good session, he asked. Sure, I said. He looked at me the way he always looked. At me, half expecting distress, finding something else, not quite having a word for what it was he found instead. "You are very calm," he said. I looked up at him. "I am from Earth," I said. He considered that. He stood in the doorway for a moment the way you stand when you have been given an answer that explains everything and nothing at the same time, and you need a moment to decide which of those it actually is. Then he went back to the cockpit. I turned to the next page, wrote the date in the upper right corner, and started on the full report. The shuttle pulled away from the station. The gas giant filled the window. For a moment, amber and rust, enormous and unhurried, turning the way planets turn, and then the course adjusted, and it was gone, replaced by the dark and the distance and the specific cold light of 212 stars between here and home. I kept writing. There was a lot to cover, and Owen would want every detail, and the coffee was gone, and the work was not. That was fine. That was just how it went.